Here we have a high performance shortboard for power surfing. And it's a specifically tuned design for those surfers that want to bury rail and have a board hold through the hardest, most committed cutbacks and turns and hacks. And like any board design, you want to match the board to the surfer's style. And so this fills that need where it's a board for surfers like Mendia. This is the Mendia model. And you know, the iconic turns that Peter Mendia has done over the years. It's a specifically tuned board that complements that style of surfing. And so what we got going is, first of all, speed. So, you know, when you're gonna do a really powerful turn, you need speed coming into it. So we don't have a ton of rocker. We actually have a fair bit of flat through the middle of the board. Almost what you call a 3-stage rocker, where you got entry so that the nose doesn't bury when you're doing a tight arc, but when you're just getting speed, jamming down the line, you got a flatter area for the water to pass between your feet here. And then not a ton of tail rocker, because you don't want the board to overturn to where it kind of goes flat and will flick out this way. That's for, you know, like a different style of surfing, but where you want the board to arc and really knife into the wave face and split the wave wide open, cut deep into the water that's moving under the surface of the wave, the power source underneath the wave, that it's actually spinning under there. And when you can slice and cut deep into that, you pull deep from a power source and, you know, drive through a turn like that and, you know, throw the big sprays that way. And so you don't have too much rocker to overturn, but you got enough to where when you back foot the thing, it really knifes. The outline is another part of it. It's fairly like knifey, like kind of like a surgeon's scalpel, because that's sort of what's going on. It's like surgeons slicing open, you know, the skin of the wave, slicing deep. And so you got not a real full nose. It's not made for groveling or getting through flat spots. It's made for when you bury it, for slicing. And then round tail, which Peter really likes the round tail in a lot of his boards, because typically a board for power surfing, high performance board for power surfing, you're gonna have it in better waves. And better waves with power really like the round tail, because the water, as it's, you know, coming off your rail and bleeding off the tail, it's not like a squash or swallow or square where it hits an abrupt point and jumps off the tail and causes, like, you know, a release, which is good for, you know, blowtails and drifting stuff. A round tail really holds the water all the way around the corner, so the board has a real positive, like, grab and hold all the way through the turn, gives it a nice follow through. Also fits in hollower waves better. So round tail is good for power gouging, hollower waves for the barrel, and so that's why we put this tail predominantly on the Mendia. We also don't have too boxy of a rail. Like I put a fairly knifey rail on here. It's softened up in the nose to be able to, you know, pull through the turn clean, and then real hard and edgy in the tail, because when you back foot that tail, you really want it to slice. So you want a nice good edge back there. And then the whole contour, which is really interesting on this board, runs a single to deep single with inset doubles to a flat or even a little bit of concave off the tail. That compresses the water through here. As you're pushing on the tail, it's actually spinning the water through the tail faster. So as you're back footing that turn really hard, it's not only grabbing the wave face, but it's also spinning the water through, so you don't get halfway through the turn and start collapsing the turn, but you get halfway through the turn and the water begins to spin even faster through the back half of the board and drive it through the turn. And with that happens at the same time is that heavy concave in the tail, it creates more grip. So, you know, with power surfing, you don't want a board where you get a lot of speed and then it releases. That's great for an air board or like a board for groveling small waves. But for something where you really want to push your hardest through turns, the more concave, the way I've seen it, the more concave, the better back in through here. So I put a lot of concave through the fins just because it acts as like a clamp. So it clamps onto the wave face, and at the same time is pushing that water through, and that clamp holds all the way through the turn while accelerating the board. And so that's a neat design feature that really caters to just really bearing into a big gouge. And then another neat thing that's going on with this rocker that's a little bit different is I do what's called the inverted fulcrum, where I've taken a lot of the curve that typically you have the entry rocker and then tail rocker, and here's your fulcrum or your center point that the board rests on. And what I've done is I take that curve and I shift all the points in the nose down and all the points in the tail up. And so what that does, just this flatter spot up under your chest, just ahead of center, it really gets the board into waves quicker and gives it burst of speed right at takeoff. And it also flies you down the line around sections, and just it really gets the board going quick down the line. But then the extra curve in the back half, when you do get on your back foot and you're pushing through that part of the turn, this part of the board is curvier, so it fits up into the steeper, curvier part of the wave more comfortably, and lets it really, rather than having it race too far on the flats, and how some boards will be designed for, say like a mushy point or something, a long mushy point. You want the board to really zing and then arc back so you can do beautiful figure 8 stuff. This is set up differently, more for like reef pass, beach break, or just real pushy hollow waves. And rather than being like a cutback board, this is a square up board. So you get that curve in the tail where it keeps it from wanting to race out in the flat too far, but keeps it here down in the trough of the wave where the water's pulling the fastest, because you get a lot of energy source where the water's pulling from the bottom of a hollow wave, and you get into that energy source rather than up here and racing out of it. You get into that energy source, you slice it open, with these rails, this type of an outline, and the lower entry, you slice that open, and then you get that tail rocker with the heavy concaves operating off of that, and you can really drive through that part, and then get the curvy part of the tail into the steep part of the wave, push your hardest without it wanting to break free or go up and out, but stay in and drive through like a knife. And so that might be the best kind of way to describe a power surfer's board, is just a knife with a lot of hold and a lot of curve in the back half, but that will accelerate through a hard drive and turn. And with that inverted fulcrum rocker, you'll almost see, with the points shifted down, a smooth entry, and then it creates almost like this bubble from like your front foot or the middle of the board up to the fins. I call it the beer belly. It's like a little beer belly in the rail line rocker of the board. That beer belly right in here, that's like a curve, almost like a pendulating curve, where when you go to set the board over, it rounds that corner and knifes in a really tight in the pocket, big cutty, loving kind of way. Most people try to avoid having a beer belly, but in this particular case, the beer belly works in your favor. So that's a breakdown on the Mendia and just the thought process and design elements that go into a board for power surfing.